Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much. We can walk and chew gum and also eat and listen at the same time, I hope. Let me first of all just say thank you to all of you for joining us. This is a very special opportunity. We're going to be welcoming Secretary of Agriculture Perdue, welcome Commissioner Brendan Carr, our members of USTelecom who have come long and far to join us here today. I'm very, very grateful for your joining us. I'm Jonathan Spalter. I am the CEO of USTelecom. We have a wonderful convening of members of the Washington policy community, the investment community, the national media who are here, and I'd also like to welcome the many men and women around the country who are actually joining us by live stream today. Welcome. I'm delighted to see so many of you here with us today, but a real shout out to the broadband providers that are among us today, members of USTelecom. They are the living and breathing testament to the really hard work that's being done across our nation in so many communities around our nation, touching the lives of our families, our enterprises, just about everywhere. It really is my pleasure this afternoon to begin our forum by introducing a widely respected industry leader who is working to bring the power and promise of broadband connectivity to every corner of Alaska, where he leads an important and innovative enterprise. Anand Vadapalli, who's chairman and CEO of Alaska Communication System, is here, and he is also, we're very lucky that he serves as the board chair of USTelecom. For the community that Anand serves, as many as 200 of them are actually not accessible by road in the far reaches of Alaska. They rely on float plane, literally on snowmobiles for food and supplies, and broadband for just about everything else, including access to healthcare, to education, and to opportunity. It really is folks like Anand and his teams in Alaska, the men and women of USTelecom and their companies throughout the country, and the businesses that they have built over generations that make the global digital economy possible. And over the past 2 decades, this is important to think about, over $1.5 trillion have flowed into American infrastructure from broadband providers. They rank among the largest private investors in the United States of America and in our economy. In fact, I'm very happy to announce today that we've just released our annual broadband CapEx figures, capital expenditure in American broadband networks, which we're pleased to announce today, and you can see it online at ustelecom.org. It's just gone live, our annual broadband CapEx survey. In 2017, U.S. broadband providers invested $76.3 billion in broadband networks here in America, and that is up $1.5 billion over 2016, bending the curve, showing a resurgence from the actual declines that we saw in 2015 and 2016. This is a very important and positive trajectory. We must sustain it. And it really is. It's leaders like Anand, the members of USTelecom, broadband providers across the nation that have stepped up with meaningful investments that are transforming our communities and bringing the ongoing promise of broadband to Americans everywhere. And that's why we're here today, to really think what is it that we must do collectively and together in public and private partnership to sustain this ongoing investment, to keep it going so that the promise of broadband and the broadband future can be realized by every single American. So Anand, please welcome. We're going to listen to you and to Commissioner Carr. And Anand will introduce the committee.
Good afternoon. Can you hear us all okay? Great. Thank you, Jonathan, for convening us to discuss the future of broadband and how wise investments, smart partnerships, and robust innovation will drive digital opportunities for consumers, businesses, and entrepreneurs in our great country. I'm honored to conduct this fireside chat with FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr. Commissioner Carr has risen through the ranks of the FCC over the years, including serving more recently as the Commission's General Counsel and Chairman Pai's lead advisor on wireless, public safety, and international issues. He's a leader on 5G and a consistent voice for sound, constructive, and modern innovation policies. Given my representation of the great state of Alaska, I will note that Commissioner Carr understands the importance of telehealth to rural America. He was the driving force behind the creation of the FCC's Connected Care pilot program, which will help bring telehealth technology to low-income Americans in rural areas. Commissioner Carr also has been instrumental in helping bring more money and great certainty into rural healthcare program, which facilitates healthcare delivery in rural and remote parts of America. And for Alaska, where many residents do not live anywhere near a doctor or a hospital, or as Jonathan mentioned, even near a road system, the rural healthcare program is a necessity and not a luxury. And we appreciate Commissioner Carr's leadership in helping to modernize this program. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner Brendan Carr. Thanks. For the audience in the room today, if you would like to pose a question to the Commissioner, you will have some index cards on your table with some pens there. Please write your question on the card and raise it, and we have USTelecom staff members in the room who will pick up your cards and get them to me, and I can weave in your questions as part of this conversation.
And if you prefer to throw something to express your viewpoint, I'm used to that as well, so have at it.
Thank you, Commissioner Carr, for joining us today. So in a little over a year as an FCC Commissioner, you've been integral in leading several FCC initiatives, including 5G and spearheading the Connected Care Notice of Inquiry, all the while visiting seemingly the entire US, including Alaska. Thank you. So how would you describe your first year?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the invitation to speak, and thanks for the introduction and the questions, and really for everything you're doing in Alaska as well to bring connectivity to some of the hardest to serve parts of the country. Been in this gig for about a year now, a little over a year, and it's been a tremendously rewarding experience. We've had the chance to spend time in about 23 states, including Alaska, and it really helps inform our policy views here in DC. If you can get outside of the Beltway and find out from the people that are really doing the hard work deploying this infrastructure, what's slowing you down, what could help you from a regulatory perspective. You mentioned Alaska, and we were in a trip there. One part, the whole trip, I think we took about 13 airplane rides. We did 3 helicopters and countless miles on what passes for roads, as you mentioned. We went to one rural healthcare clinic out there where it took actually a 1940s Grumman Goose airplane to fly into this community and then go down essentially a gravel road to visit a healthcare clinic. And really starting this job, the very first trip that I took as a commissioner was to a small town called Claremont, North Carolina. It's a town of about 1,300 people, a couple hours north of Charlotte, and it's the home to a fiber manufacturing plant. And I started my trip there because that's really the guts of the network, the guts of broadband. The plant employs about 750 people, and a lot of what we're trying to do with the commission is how do we keep plants like that fully employed and getting more fiber deployed. So it's been very helpful to get out of DC a lot during this year.
Thank you. Speaking of fiber and fiber deployment, that's what my colleagues on the USTelecom membership, that's what we do for a living. And certainly, what we do on the fiber side, on the fiber broadband side, represents the backbone of all communications, wireline or wireless. And particularly as 5G makes increased use of small cells, ensuring robust wireline backhaul will be incredibly important. What is your perspective on wireline broadband as a component of broader 5G deployment? And what's your perspective on where we are in terms of our state of readiness for that, and what could we be doing?
Yeah. It's a good question, because we talk a lot in DC right now about 5G, and a lot of that conversation is focused, rightly so, on small cells and making sure we get those antennas out there, and we're taking a lot of regulatory reforms. But really, when you step back and think about 5G, when you think about next generation connectivity, it's about driving the data to the network, the wired network, faster. And so we are going to need many, many miles more of fiber and other high-capacity connections to get to 5G. It's really an upgrade to the entire network. And we've seen that across the country. We were in a small town, about 1,000 people, Beatty, Nevada. There's a healthcare clinic there that was going to close because of the economics of trying to serve a rural community. And a provider brought a new fiber connection to the healthcare clinic, and that enabled it to stay open because a doctor could stay remotely in a larger town that could support the economy of a doctor. And he would do virtual online visits at that healthcare clinic. So when I think about the future, when we think about 5G, you're right that we need to be cognizant of how do we push fiber and other high-speed connections deeper into networks, deeper into rural America. So we're focused on that.
Right. By the way, again, a reminder for the audience, if you have any questions, please do write them down on the index cards and send them over to me, and I'll be happy to weave them in. Moving to a topic close to my heart, telehealth and rural healthcare, particularly given the remoteness of some of the communities we serve. Can you share with us what you and the FCC have done over the last year to address the advancement of rural healthcare and your priorities in this area over the next 6 to 12 months?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we take telehealth and ensuring broadband connectivity for healthcare facilities, whether they're rural or otherwise, as one of our top priorities. In June, for instance, we focused on the rural healthcare program, which is helping to provide connectivity to rural clinics, including in Alaska. And we voted to increase the budget or the funding for that program by about 40%. And the decision is already hopefully paying dividends in the sense that if we hadn't made that decision in June, a lot of providers would have seen at least a 15% cut to their funding. And so we're really focused on how do we get the funding there, how do we provide certainty there, because we understand more broadly across rural America, hospitals and clinics are shutting down at really unprecedented rates. And broadband connectivity, providing funding to these facilities for that broadband is key to keeping them open and enabling consumers to take advantage of that.
Thank you. So the FCC has teed up potential reforms to multiple elements of the current rate of return support mechanisms that directly affect carriers' ability to receive sufficient and predictable funding. Do you have any views you would like to share on the future of rate of return universal services?
Yeah, it's a topic there's a lot of interest in, obviously. When I think about funding for the rate of return side, one of the things that comes to my mind immediately is providing certainty. People in positions like you have to make massive investment decisions on a pretty long time horizon. And so I think at the FCC, we need to push harder in these programs to provide the certainty over a length of period of time and not come back and change those decisions if we can avoid it to support the really long-term investment. So certainty is going to be a key driver for me as we look at some of the rate of returns and making sure that we have sufficient and predictable funding. The times that I spent on the road, last week, Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota. You go to these towns, Thompson, Minnesota, and you go to some of the largest employers in these communities, whether it was a dairy farm, a steel fabrication plant. And I met with the heads of those entities. Every single one of them said, but for having a high-speed broadband connection, they wouldn't be in that community.
Yeah.
And so think about the jobs and the economic opportunity that rides on when you have broadband in rural America. And I think that is what you have to keep front of mind when you make these decisions at the FCC about helping to fund these, is the return that we get when you look at all the economic opportunity that's supported in a community once we get broadband deployed there.
I couldn't agree more, and particularly in communities like Alaska, where we have over 200 non-road system communities and folks who want to support the kind of lifestyles that they're used to by tradition, but also deserve the economic opportunity that's available to all Americans. Broadband is the only way to expose them to that kind of opportunity, so I could not agree with you more. So this is the Broadband Investment Forum, and your vote on net neutrality played a huge part in not just restoring internet freedom, but restoring investment in broadband. Has your vote had the effect that you intended? What are you seeing as you talk to the communities you visit, talk to broadband providers, other businesses? What is your perspective on where this is headed?
Yeah, very happy with the decision and very happy with what we're seeing for consumers and communities across the country in light of that decision. Going into it, as you probably know, the 2015 FCC decision to classify broadband for the first time as essentially a 1930s style utility had a very detrimental impact on investment, and what that means is on deployment for communities. In the year after the FCC's 2015 decision, we saw over a $3 billion decline in investment in this space, and that trend continued into the next year. We had over a $5 billion decline in investment in those 2 years that we had Title II on the books. And we've seen a reversal of that trend in light of the new approach we're taking at the FCC. I think the 2017 figures showed somewhere in the order of 13%, 15% increase in investment. I think on the wireless side separately in 2018, I've seen figures that show an 18% increase already in that space. So we are seeing a real significant increase in investment in this space, which is critical because as a country, we've made some good progress with getting broadband deployed, but there's still millions of Americans that don't have the high-speed connection that they want and that they should have. And the key to getting there, in part, is increasing investment in this space. So I'm glad to see that we've reversed that trend with this policy. And the other piece of it that we saw is not just declining investment, but it was unnecessary. And we're seeing that as well. After reversing the Title II decision, we have a free and open internet. Consumers are protected. No one wants to see blocking or throttling, anti-consumer conduct. And now we have the Federal Trade Commission that's there as a strong cop on the beat. It was not a cop on the beat at all for 2 years after Title II because statutorily it didn't have the authority once broadband was classified as Title II. So consumers are protected, investment is pouring back into the space. So I'm very glad with the decision that we made and the direction that we're seeing.
That's actually a good lead-in into one of the questions I got from the audience. I'll read the question, maybe I'll paraphrase a little bit and offer my perspective and open it up to you, Commissioner. So the question is, what actions can the FCC take to encourage states to provide support mechanisms for broadband? Of course, states rarely want to support things they can't regulate. But we also, and now I'll kind of add, my perspective, which clearly, we're also concerned about regulation at an individual state level. The most recent California legislation on cybersecurity privacy is a case in point where, we've taken a point of view on that. But is there an opportunity, Commissioner, from your vantage point, where there could be a constructive participation by states in encouraging investment, and how do you see that working with the FCC?
I absolutely think so. And on the one hand, how do we get more broadband deployed? One step is regulatory reform, and we've been engaged on that at the FCC, taking very concrete steps to do that. We issued a decision in March, for instance, that cut about $2 billion from the regulatory costs of the federal reviews associated with new small cell deployment. We issued a decision last month that cut about another $2 billion of regulatory costs that had been imposed on those same deployments by state and local governments. So cutting red tape is a big part of it, but the funding and the subsidies to the question is another big piece of it. And I certainly welcome additional support from states in that effort. There is going to be portions of the country that there'll never be the private sector business case to deploy, and that's why we at the federal level have a universal service program, a $10 billion a year fund that we're in the process of reorienting to support rural deployment. And I think there can be a role for states in that as well.
Great, thank you. So looking at, I've been told that we have maybe 3 or 4 minutes left. So one question, which is staying on the subject of rural America, as you've toured the country extensively during your time as commissioner, what lessons have you learned? What are your key takeaways from those trips?
Yeah, you pick up interesting little pieces along the way that don't always filter back up through the lobbyists in DC. So We were in Plymouth County, Iowa with a small provider, and they talked to us a lot about the challenges they have in crossing railroads with broadband deployment. And then ever since then, everywhere I go, I ask about it, and providers say, yeah, it is unbelievable the challenges that we have negotiating with railroads, either to go under, over, around, and there's a lot of railroad crossings you need to do in rural America. Similarly, federal lands. We were in a small town, Mountain Springs, Nevada. There's a power line that runs right through the middle of the community, and there's broadband fiber that runs right along that power line, but it's federal lands, forest lands, around where the power line goes. And so even though you can see broadband going right through town, to get the permissions from the federal government to run fiber off of that line right into the community through the federal lands is the bottleneck that's slowing it down. So you pick up little issues and challenges along the way that we can then take back to DC and try to make some progress on.
Great. Thank you. So actually, we have several other good questions, but we are almost out of time, and I want to leave an opportunity for you, Commissioner Carr, to offer any closing remarks. So I will ask what I thought was an interesting question, very different. So what are you thinking when you
just end it like that.
No. Let me complete the question.
Every morning I wake up.
So what are you thinking when you get to the top of one of those macro towers that you have recently climbed?
Yeah, it's a good question. So on Friday, we were in Rowena, South Dakota, and we climbed to the top of a 2,000-foot broadcast television antenna, and it certainly changes the perspective when you get up there. And really, for me, what it brings home is how lucky we are as a country to have such hardworking telecom crews, from broadband to broadcasting. They're just unmatched in their skill and professionalism. You turn your phone on, you want to stream Netflix, you think, again, like maybe this is just pixie dust that makes it work. But it's a tremendous amount of on-the-ground work from an infrastructure perspective to do that. And on that vein, I also want to recognize the ongoing work that's going down in the Gulf Coast right now. We have construction crews that are working literally 24/7.
Yes.
Men and women whose own houses have been impacted, and in many cases destroyed by these storms, and they're working to restore communications down there in really difficult, trying, hot circumstances. They can dump 20 hours into a project, and then a power company looking, and there's about, I think, 7,000 power company crews trying to put up new poles, doing their work, and it'll cut a fiber line that just took 20 hours to repair. 4 or 5 days into it, we got a report from just one provider on the ground that noted they had 40 flat tires from just rolling their trucks through communities that have been devastated, and the challenges associated with that. So very grateful for all the work that crews like that are doing so that we can stream Netflix at night and watch our favorite TV shows.
It's a great point, and I know there are several colleagues of mine, a couple of whom I've been on the phone with, who are going through those recovery efforts right now. And these are not things you plan for. These are, you plan, you prepare, but you can only do so much. And then, you have just thousands of good men and women on the field at the end of the day who make a difference. So I think a big shout out to everyone who's involved in the recovery efforts. So with that, let me wrap up by just offering the floor to you, Commissioner, for any closing remarks you have for the audience here.
Yeah, just, I think when I think about broadband in the telecom space, we have such a great opportunity right now to create jobs, to spur investment, to grow the economy, and we're laser focused on that at the FCC. We are taking concrete action, we're moving quickly, we're cutting regs to free up investment, because ultimately that's going to be what benefits communities, whether it's economic opportunity, telehealth, healthcare. We're just very focused on that.
Great. Well, thank you again, Commissioner, for joining us today. Appreciate it. Thank you all.
Very much, John and Commissioner Carr. That was great. And I'd now like to welcome the panelists for our discussion about the future of broadband connectivity, and particularly from the perspective of the C-suite. We know that many of our broadband providers are facing not just opportunities, but various challenges on the horizon. We actually wanted to get that senior executive perspective on those questions. And so I'm really glad that we're joined here by, again, Anand Vadapalli, who is the president and CEO of Alaska Communications, Jason Williams, who is CEO of Blackfoot in Missoula, Montana. And I'd also like to welcome Radha Sekar, who is the CEO of the Universal Service Administrative Company, or USAC, which is a very close partner with all of us in providing broadband support to communities and families across the country. We're also very lucky to have as our moderator this afternoon Jennifer Fritchie, who is a managing director at Wells Fargo and is a well-known thought leader and analyst of our business, our industry, and so we'd like to welcome them to have a conversation from the C-suite. Please join us up here on the podium.
Yes. Yes.
Good seeing you again.
Same here. Hi, I'm Jennifer. Hi, Jennifer. Nice to meet you.
Jennifer, hey, how are you?
Nice to meet you, Jason.
Nice to meet you. Great. So as we all get seated, thank you, Jonathan and USTelecom overall, for inviting me in to join such an esteemed panel and lead it. So I'm very excited. For those of you who don't know, as Jonathan mentioned, I'm Jennifer Fritchie. I'm what's called a sell-side analyst. So I write research on wireless, wireline, towers, data centers. But one of our consistent themes of late has been fibers, and wired is very exciting right now, and probably in many ways more exciting than wireless these days. So it seems like the forgotten pipes are no longer forgotten. And we're going to kind of jump right into those very themes. And I thought we'd just maybe start with Jonathan's comments about the CapEx numbers. I thought that was very interesting, and in my world, maybe somewhat surprising, because many people feel like the investment in wired is really not as strong as it once was, and to see, as Jonathan said, a bend in that curve is, we'll be writing a note on that, because I think it's really quite worthy of noting. And maybe, Anand, why don't I start with you and talking about kind of how you feel that the markets, so my world, are correct. If your view is they're correctly valuing the facilities-based telecom companies. I mean, it's kind of it's a big question, but love your opinion.
Thank you, Jennifer. I don't believe that there's a one-size-fits-all answer for that question, and certainly I can't speak for other companies. What I can say is I don't believe ALSK reflects the intrinsic value of the business, but I think maybe some of my other colleagues would agree with that remark. I think we have stable, good, high-quality revenue, cash flow positive businesses, and with the rate at which broadband's growing and the opportunities there, at least in my case, I can certainly say that I don't believe the market fairly reflects the value of the business.
And one of the themes I've been writing a lot about is 5G, that the wired investment is, as I mentioned, taking noteworthy. So much of, I think if you asked any wireless engineer in the word association game, how would you define 5G? And the word fiber would probably be the first word out of his or her mouth. Would you agree with that and the role of 5G that you all and your peers could play?
Absolutely. I think you would hear the words fiber and you would hear the words permitting from any provider in that regard and all the issues thereof. I think broadly 5G for us, and we talked about it during the fireside chat with Commissioner Carr as well. I think from our perspective, at least from my perspective, it's like any other technology development that presents both an opportunity and a threat. In terms of the opportunity for companies like us who are in the fiber broadband business, we love the fact that you see now the small cell network, which is going to increase the cell site footprint by an order of magnitude, literally. I see that in my own markets. And the opportunity to provide backhaul to all of that, we see that as a tremendous opportunity for us, as I'm sure many broadband companies in this room do. On the other side, like any other technology is a disruptor, and technology can be a threat. And I think it's really important for all of us to figure out how we evolve our business models to create value for customers in this new technological environment. And I think, those of us who can do that well, I think we will continue to grow. So it goes both ways.
Jason, I want to bring you into the conversation as well. Blackfoot is just this year, I believe, announced a launch of a new open innovation lab, and that with the aim of partnering with some startup companies to kind of accelerate the delivery of products and services to the market. Can you talk about what led your company to make that decision, and kind of what do you see as the longer term impact there?
You bet. Pardon me. You bet. Thanks, Jennifer. There was a report issued by the Kauffman Foundation a couple of years ago that identified that the state of Montana, on a per capita basis, had more high-tech startup companies than anywhere else in the country. There was also another report that was issued about a year ago that indicated Montana had received an influx of about $100 million in venture capital dollars. Now, $100 million isn't much in the venture capital world, but in Montana, it's significant, and it's even more significant because, pardon me, a couple of years earlier, that number was 0. So we effectively went from 0 to 100 million in a matter of 2 years. We also have been receiving a number of Silicon Valley refugees moving to Montana. They realize you can come to a place like Montana, and because of the connectivity we have, you can run your business and also have a high quality of life. There was an additional study done that identified that Montana, again on a per capita basis, has more telecommuters than any other state in the country. So this combination of things had us think about, well, what role do we play in this larger ecosystem? And obviously, we're providing the connectivity to that, but we thought we could do something more, and asked if we could do more. And that led to the opening of our Open Innovation Lab. It's effectively a corporate accelerator. Corporate business accelerators aren't new. All the Fortune 100 companies have them. But it is very new in the small and mid-sized telecom space. So what we do is we take high-tech companies and we effectively provide them mentoring, right? We provide them a space where they might have a brilliant idea, but they don't have it productized yet. So we bring our product and marketing people, and we help them create a product. Or there might be people that have a great product, but no business plan. So we bring in our finance people to help them develop a business plan. The other thing that's really important about it is what we offer these startup companies is connections. Blackfoot provides some sort of services to all of the hospitals, all the large hospitals in the state of Montana. So if you're in the healthcare high-tech space, you can't walk into a large hospital with your idea. But when you partner with Blackfoot, we have the ability to help them get their foot in the door. So we interviewed about 40 or 50 companies, and we boiled it down. We have 3 companies in this initial cohort, we call it. And it is a video content provider, a healthcare technology provider, and an oil and gas mapping company provider. So in essence, in sum, we provide them physical space, connectivity, mentoring, and hopefully the result being that they would have a long-term company that they can launch, create jobs right in Missoula, Montana.
Great. Interesting stats about Montana. I didn't appreciate that. Radha, why don't we bring in USAC's role? And can you talk a little bit about your role? A key part of everything we're hearing is how can the government be able to better support broadband deployment? And what do you see as USAC's role there?
So USAC, even though USAC is not government, but we are implementing a major government program, which is the Universal Service Fund programs. And I know you all talk about broadband, and the broadband is the biggest piece of today's discussion. The way USAC's USF programs are administered, they're all based on the FCC orders. The fundamental, I call the high-cost program as the fundamental, the ground-laying program for the broadband. We have both the Connect America Fund as well as the Mobility Fund. And on an average, USAC spends more than $4.5 billion of USF funds in supporting laying out actually the broadband network across the United States, specifically in the areas of unserved and the underserved areas. And why that is important, we also have other USF funds programs, such as Schools and Library and Rural Healthcare Program, which is, I think Jason touched based on it, and the rural healthcare is really an important telemedicine-based program. And also Lifeline, when you have the high-cost support, you automatically have, in those areas, you're supposed to support the Lifeline program, where you provide the telephone services to the underserved people in United States. I believe USAC enables working with the FCC, laying the groundwork for increasing the broadband across the United States, specifically in the areas of unserved and underserved.
And that brings up another good question. How can you ensure that the money that is used is not used to overbuild some of the prior government subsidies?
Excellent point. Actually, the FCC rules specifies, assume that if you are laying fiber, because many times when you're laying fiber, your excess capacity is also addressed. They have a specific, I'm not a telecommunication expert, I have my panelists who are telecommunication experts here, and the room is filled with telecommunication specialists. I do know that the fiber, there is a set of fiber when you lay it out, there is a basic average type of fiber you lay it out, but that may be too much of the requirement for schools or rural healthcare facilities. So the FCC rules really talk about the excess capacity. How do you handle the excess capacity? We work with the applicants to address the excess capacity questions, and that's how we do it.
Got it.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Gentlemen, I want to go back to the findings today from USTelecom with that ramp up in CapEx. We were talking about fiber.
Yep.
You mentioned regulation, and that leads to my next question. What are the barriers? Because I follow some of the fiber trenchers who are literally have the hard hats on and digging ditches, and their backlog's going like this, but it seems like zoning, regulation gets in the way all the time. Are you seeing that, or what do you see as the impediments to doing what you want to do?
I don't know that I would. There's always issues with any investment. So I think from my vantage point, the first really is more about making sure that our regulators are sensitive to this. I mean, when Commissioner Carr made his comments about the issues for railroad crossings, as an example, and what we see in terms of permitting for cell towers. When you have to grow from 200 macro towers to 3,000 small towers, you cannot have 6 months taken for permitting for every tower. It just doesn't work.
Right.
The math doesn't work. So there needs to be greater speed there. I mean, the way I would characterize it, there's a usual cycle where technology advancements lead. They're followed by broader investments and adoption of technology. And usually, the policy regulatory discussion is way behind.
Nice.
I mean, think about all of the attention, public debate today about privacy and who has access to what data. I would offer that debate is a decade overdue. All those developments, whether it's Facebook or Google, I mean, they started 2 decades ago. And here we are now in the last year or two actually having a conversation about it. So to me, I would offer to us that industry and government, we need to be cognizant of how we come together and to do so in a thoughtful and constructive, but yet expeditious manner. I think that's really important.
Got it. Jason?
Yeah, I would agree with what Anand said. We do run into the anomalies with the permitting issue in one of our municipalities, for example. They just changed their permitting requirements where when we submit a permit to construct facilities, a fiber network in their community, we have to have that project done within 30 days of the permit being issued. Well, that's ridiculous, especially in a place like Montana where the ground's frozen for 6 months out of the year. We simply can't do that. I will note that Blackfoot, again, and I echo what Anand said, it's not all broadband providers are the same, right? I mean, we are a very large CLEC. In fact, we're the largest CLEC in the state of Montana, one of the growing larger CLECs regionally. So, in fact, that business is way larger than our ILEC business right now. So on the CapEx side, I'm looking to invest both my universal service dollars in my rural areas, but then generating cash flow to be able to make those investments on the CLEC side, which need it just as much. So I think any time policy makers can give any sense of stability or certainty around policy, it's helpful. So for example, on the USF side, Blackfoot is an ACAM elector. So we know what our USF support's going to be for the next 8.5 years. From a capital planning standpoint, that makes my life really easy because I know how much cash is going to be coming in the door. I can't understate the importance of the FCC's decision on the Restoring Internet Freedom Order. You know, by eliminating the specter of Title II regulation that was hanging over us, it really gives us a sense of certainty as to where the industry is going and what we're able to do. So I think to the extent anytime there's a certain level of certainty or stability given for a prolonged period of time, it encourages companies like mine to feel comfortable making capital investments.
Great. Can I ask all of you, what are you investing in, and Rana, what are you seeing being invested in that makes you most excited right now? Because I think that's the changing future is.
So I think of it in a couple of areas. The investment is pretty exciting, at least for a person like me who's coming into this industry new. The investment in the broadband technology. To Jason's point, most of the investment that is made by the USF funds in the broadband side, it is for years to come. So you start with 10 years program. And you do support the companies, the telecom companies who are in that business. Almost every month you have a standard income stream coming into it. That really takes the risk as a business person. To me, that takes a whole lot of risk away from the telecom companies because they can plan for their capital investment. And the more and more what I see from FCC on the high cost program, there are many new orders are coming in. Not only we are just talking about investing in broadband, FCC is also looking into how overall the services are available today. They use that as a baseline to have auctions and really support the areas where there is not enough broadband and increase it and follow it up with some kind of a verification. We have the new performance measure order that is going to start from 2020. You also check your latencies. Not only you invest in it, you go back and check on it. And to me, that is really exciting, especially if I go to my beach house in Delaware, and many times the internet doesn't work, and I have only one company who provides service.
Right.
And I would ask my team, when is all these locations are going to get more services? You can look at what USF Fund is supporting to a personal basis, how it helps. And that's where I think it's pretty exciting, and not only in that area, and also in the rural health area, FCC has increased the fund. To me, that is the telemedicine. Telemedicine is the biggest thing for the future, especially if you, I'm sure many of you have seen this a year ago or so. There was a 60 Minutes episode that covered about a scientist who was stuck in Antarctica, had breast cancer. Using telemedicine, how her life was saved. I mean, that is a phenomenal thing to be invested. And I'm happy to say FCC has increased the funding for rural healthcare. So those are the exciting pieces I see.
That's great.
So a few years ago, I was having dinner with my nephew, who's 25, 26 at the time. So you're classic millennial. And he was appalled that we actually charge for broadband. That it should be free. He wasn't trying to be, a smart cookie about it. I mean, that's just the mindset, if you will. And then you compare and contrast that with the comment that Jonathan made in the opening up this session, where he just reported that the USTelecom membership in the last year has invested $76 billion. Yes, there is funding that comes through support mechanisms established by the FCC, but the vast majority of that are private sector investments that we are all making. Infrastructure and broadband is not free. And for those of us who, particularly in the public companies side, capital allocation is probably the single most important decision that we can make for our companies. We have to try and find that balance between how do we earn a return on that investment to satisfy our shareholders on one hand, and on the other hand, at the same time, be competitive in the market and create value for customers. So to me, I think our investments will continue. We have to invest more and more in fiber. I think the advancements in 5G will help. You will see a tremendous increase in the densification of the access network fiber technologies. You will see all that happen. But I think more importantly, I think we all have to look at how our business models evolve to actually begin to earn a return on that investment. And that's the part that I'm probably more excited about, is the evolution of our business models and what that may mean for all of us. So with my own company and the others, I think that's where probably we'll see more change over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, I agree with Anand. The thing that I'm most excited about is the transformation. It's not a wired and or a wireless network anymore. It's a convergence, right? Mm-hmm. The wireless network doesn't exist without providers like Anand and I putting in mobile wireless backhaul. But as we're putting in more and more of the physical infrastructure, what I'm really excited about too, at least on the enterprise side, is you have software-defined networks. And what that means, we've got these amazing networks that we're spending all this money on. And as people in the technology industry are figuring out ways they can leverage those networks for the benefit of customers, to be able to go into my customers and provide them with a software-based telecom network that enables them to do things they've never been able to do before, like bandwidth on demand, very high security at virtual links, things like that, and where we're heading is what I'm most excited about.
Great. Well, I think we'll end it with that. I'll just say that I do feel like there's been such an underappreciation in the Wall Street world, certainly about how much the rural community is doing in terms of fiber investment, and maybe this $76.3 billion number will be the kick in the pants my group needs to see that. So thank you, everyone, and I think we're on to the next.
Well, I think if you have time for
Oh, right, I'm sorry. If we have any Q&A, we certainly have time for it. Any questions from the audience? Jonathan?
We're out of the quiet period now,
Nope.
as of the Monday, so I think it would be interesting just to know if you have any thoughts as we're looking ahead to new programs, new opportunities, and the design for the CAF 3. Do you have any thoughts on what that should or might look like?
I'd be interested in hearing what the other has to say.
I mean, I would just say, I think anything that can again provide sort of predictability, sufficiency, but also flexibility. Back on the ACAM stuff, the great thing about that program too is the commission set up rules that said, okay, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to give you X amount of dollars. In exchange, you have to build out Y number of broadband locations. We're not going to dictate to you, your pricing or the methodologies or cost studies or any of this crazy legacy rate of return stuff that a lot of people are still dealing with. We're just going to give you the money, and because we trust you, broadband provider, that you know best how to invest that money and stretch it the farthest. But we're still going to hold you accountable too by building out these certain build-out obligations, I think something like that would be incredibly compelling. And there's no other way to be willing to be able to take on those obligations otherwise. Again, specificity, but at the same time, flexibility with an oversight of accountability.
And I would say the same thing. The exciting part of the several new orders that are coming from FCC is not only being able to enable the telecom industry to continue its growth of the broadband, at the same time requiring them to be accountable. That is where the performance measure order is coming. Yeah, 10-year guaranteed of the investment for the telecom companies. At the same time, you come back and look at, are you performing at the rate at which you are required to perform? And also, the performance is in several ways. Not only you are deploying the locations you have guaranteed to deploy, but also is the latencies are meeting the requirements of the standards. I think that's a piece is really interesting that holds people accountable, at the same time support them in their deployment. I don't think it is in a punitive nature the order reads. It's almost like, if you haven't done it, let's work together and figure it out how we can catch up with the performance.
Great. Yes.
You have maybe the service providers, but a lot of discussion about mapping and the accuracy of who, the accuracy of the mapping out there, who has broadband and who doesn't. Any suggestions about how to improve accuracy of the maps?
I mean, it's a tough one. There's always a certain amount of lag, time by necessity, just how the process works. But I would just say that it's got to be improved coordination, between us as providers developing our own Google Earth maps of our own systems, and then how do we make that available to regulators or other bodies, if you will, to make that publicly available. I don't know that there's, I have any brilliant ideas other than continuing to improve what we have going on.
Yeah, I would completely agree with Anand, the concept of government and providers working together to come up with a solution. I think there's a lot more benefits to collaboration and coming up with something that's workable from a service provider standpoint, but also gives the regulator and the government and USAC what they need to ensure oversight and to make sure we're targeting USF dollars, if that's the case, in areas that really are underserved. So collaboration, I think, is the key.
Jonathan, maybe in response to your question on what could a CAF 3 look like, hypothetically, I would offer to you that in communities like ours, and Alaska is one extreme example of it, but Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, any of the rural communities we have in our state, in our country, one of the biggest challenges is actually getting to the communities. That is the challenge. So if you think about, I would encourage us to think about this in a more granular way. You have the long haul fiber, then you have the access network, which is in the communities, and then you have the middle mile, which is getting to the communities. Access network, there are different mechanisms. Of course, there's legacy copper and legacy coax cable that cable companies and telecoms use today. There's fiber. And then there's the whole spectrum of 5G, whether it's from fixed wireless all the way to mobile wireless. There's different technologies on the access side. But it's getting to the communities that's a big issue. And I don't think that, and some of these cases, as Commissioner Carr mentioned, sometimes there is not a private sector investment business case to be made for those. And that's where I think we need to look at some mechanisms, is how to get to some of these communities in rural America. And that's the only way you democratize internet access across the nation and not make it the purview of the denser communities at the expense of the less populated rural communities.
I would say on the mapping, USAC working with the FCC has started collecting the latitude, longitude information where the broadband has been available, especially for the Connect America Fund. We have initiated that process. I think that a couple of weeks ago you saw the public notice from FCC, and that map is available. You should be able to go. It's just the beginning. Our interest is not only to do for the wired line, also to do for the wireless side of it. And it's a vision. We just started working on the vision.
Are there any more questions? I'm sorry, over here.
Now that the reverse auction part of Cat 2 is over, do you guys have any reactions or lessons learned that could be used going forward into future allocations?
That's an interesting question, because with the reverse auction, it's really the decisions are made by FCC. They look at the mapping, where the reverse auction, how the winners, I have to say, the winners are going to play in it. So the lessons learned, we don't have enough stats to give you a specific lessons learned. So that'll take probably another 6 to 8 months to figure out the lessons learned. We are in the process of collecting the data and working on it.
Can I ask, in your communities, what is the average speed you offer? And when you make the investment to draw fiber deeper to the home, are you seeing the MSO or cable company respond to that?
So the speeds, particularly in a state like Alaska, can be wildly variable. And I think averages can be misleading. You have, in denser communities like Anchorage, you have speeds up to gigabit, even on the consumer side.
Really?
Right. But you go into the rural communities where the backhaul into that community is still satellite. Well, you can imagine what speeds, and more importantly, with 600-700 milliseconds of latency, the quality of internet in those communities. So, and hence my comment on middle mile infrastructure. So it's wildly variable. I think some of the cable telecom distinctions, I think we probably, it's in some ways, we kind of move past that, and all the companies are looking at new ways of getting to customers, and ultimately, if you think about it, we're all playing with different kinds of access technologies. For example, Alaska Communications, including in our CAF2 deployments, we are extensively using fixed wireless. And we see us delivering very credible high-speed broadband, potentially up to 100 megabits per second or higher, using fixed wireless access technologies. So I think we'll see those developments, and we'll continue to see the improvement. But at least in states with low population density and dispersed communities, I hate to be a broken record on this, but middle mile becomes our constraint.
Yeah, I would echo what Anand said. We do a lot of fixed wireless too. The only other thing I'd add is it becomes an affordability issue, right? I mean, the irony of people willing to spend $5 a day on a cup of coffee, but you charge more than $50 a month for broadband, and they lose their minds. Like that's, it's really frustrating. So I can make an incredible capital investment to bring them fiber to the home, but just like Anand's nephew, I expect my internet to be free. Well, I'm not going to pay that much more, even though service provider, you just spent $20,000 building me a fiber drop. So it's a balance to be able to come up with the money and educating consumers about the benefits of what you really get when you do get fiber broadband. That's on the consumer market. On the business market, I think it's clear that there's an understanding fiber-based Ethernet services right now for certain larger business and enterprise customers. It's the only way to go, and those businesses are generally willing to pay for it.
I would agree on this big distinction between consumer and business. On the business side, we go all the way to wavelengths, and in some limited cases, maybe even dark fiber kind of situations. So on the business side, I think there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more opportunity to offer very high speed, because there's payment for value at that point in time.
Got it. One more question.
Switching gears just a little bit, can you talk about maybe what are some of our best opportunities for investing in cybersecurity a little bit more, particularly from the medium and small company perspectives?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I think, first of all, USTelecom has done absolutely stellar work in trying to bring together resources on the cybersecurity front. we can offer to you the link on the USTelecom website that actually lists all the resources that are available to small, medium business. So that I would offer to anyone in the audience and on the live stream, please go check it out because I think it's a superb list of resources, one. Two, I know from the government perspective, most recently the Department of Homeland Security sponsored a private-public sector partnership, initially focusing on the tri-sector of finance, energy, and telecom, and how do you begin to secure critical infrastructure in the country. So there is clearly that level of attention from the policymakers as well. But I think what I would offer to businesses, particularly the smaller businesses that can't afford full-time IT staff, is, just as you think about cybersecurity has to be part of your design. It cannot be an afterthought anymore. It's most critical because at the end of the day, we are all only as strong as the weakest link in the chain. And if in our value stream you have a small business that's the weakest link, that's exactly what you could do. So it's a great question, but USTelecom, I would say, has a tremendous resource pool available to small, medium business.
Great, I think we'll end it there. Thank you so much. It was a great panel. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Well, thank you, panelists and Jennifer, for that really interesting conversation. Welcome, Secretary Perdue, and to your team that's just arrived. We really are glad to have you. I am here to do one more introduction to a real leader in the broadband industry who will introduce more properly Secretary Perdue to you all. Tony Thomas is President and CEO of InStream Communications, where since 2014, he really has helped connect Windstream to many, many rural Americans, communities, and enterprises around the country. In fact, Windstream is one of our largest providers of telecommunication services in rural communities in the United States of America. We at USTelecom are honored to have Tony as a member of our board of directors since January of this year. He has made a huge impact. He really is one of our more visionary leaders in the broadband industry and in the future of broadband, and an invaluable asset to our community and to our association. So please, Tony, come and introduce Secretary Perdue.
Thank you, Jonathan. Good afternoon. Thank you for that warm introduction, Jonathan. I feel like you've oversold me a bit, but I'll go with it. First, I want to thank express my thanks to USTelecom for setting up this event. Jonathan and his team do a great job bringing together America's broadband providers. And really what we're doing is we're highlighting the need for a coordinated public-private effort to complete the task of connecting rural America. Something critical to all of us in the room. I'm delighted to have the chance to speak to you on behalf of the membership of USTelecom and share a bit about our rural broadband goals and priorities. I'm also pleased to be here today with Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue and Commissioner Carr. I'll have more to say about Secretary Perdue when I introduce him in a few minutes. But I want to thank Commissioner Carr now for his leadership on wireless infrastructure and most recently on the 5G order, which will speed up small cell wireless deployments as we've been talking about this afternoon. This is an important step to broadband ubiquity and the networks of the future. On that note, Windstream is rapidly expanding our fixed wireless network. We can now serve over 350,000 wireless pre-qualified enterprise customers, and we're excited to work with the Commission to ensure the availability of even more spectrum for fixed wireless services. We also are using fixed wireless to reach broadband customers in very rural locations covered by the FCC Connect America program, including places like Montrose, Georgia. As one of the nation's largest broadband providers focused on rural areas, we are well aware of the unique challenges presented by building in these rural areas. When I took over as CEO in 2014, I thought I was entering the world of telecom business, and I soon realized it was a little more like running a construction company some days. We faced a particularly difficult situation in North Georgia, for example, where rocky soil, beautiful mountainous terrain, and dense woods presented unique deployment barriers, as Secretary Perdue is well aware. Despite those challenges, we made significant progress delivering faster broadband speeds to more customers there. We pushed fiber deeper into the network and enhanced the frontline electronic nodes that enable broadband and that serve those individual neighborhoods in Georgia. We made significant investments to increase the capacity in our packet optical network and added diverse 100 gigabit links. In effect, we built new freeways to ensure that our customers' broadband traffic flew to Atlanta and then out to the internet seamlessly. We upgraded our cable television network in North Georgia to deliver speeds of up to 100 meg to more than 67,000 households, and that'll soon be upgraded to 300 meg by the end of the year. We began deploying 1 gigabit service to several communities as well across Georgia. Today, we're principally working with 3 network architectures to deliver broadband: fiber to the node, fixed wireless, and a technology sometimes referred to as super vectoring, which is a DSL technology. We also spend an enormous amount of time trying to figure out how we can get more speed to more customers in a more cost-effective manner. 2 years ago for Windstream, the average broadband node that we replaced cost $80,000, and the average timeline for implementation was 6 to 9 months. We challenged the team to cut the cost curve by 80% and drive the deployment time down from 6 to 9 months to 30 days. And I can tell you, we have accomplished that goal. We are able to do that because we are leveraging next generation technologies. You heard a little bit about that this afternoon as well, like software-defined networking. And for those familiar with Ethernet technologies, our VLANs, our broadband nodes, are 100% configured by software in an automated way. It's that kind of breakthrough in technology and software planning and deployment that we've been perfecting over the last 18 months and is really now coming together in a more meaningful way, not only for Windstream, but for our entire industry. At Windstream, we expect approximately 1.5 million homes in our ILEC footprint will qualify for 50 meg or greater speeds by year end, representing almost 40% of our footprint. Even though Windstream is responsible for funding the bulk of the new network build and network upgrades, federal funds are extremely helpful and can ultimately be the determining factor in whether we decide to expand broadband into new areas. On that note, we are very pleased to see that the Congress has been looking to the USDA to incentivize even more broadband deployment. This is an important social and economic imperative in the 21st century. I think we all understand that. And the administration's leadership in this area is admirable. I'm sure that I speak on behalf of the USTelecom membership when I say that we look forward to working with the RUS to ensure that those funds are made available for building broadband in the most underserved and disconnected communities across the country. It is essential that the new sources of broadband funding include conditions that limit overbuilding and the duplication of existing programs like CAF. This is critical to ensuring that the public resources are used in the most effective and efficient way possible as we go forward. In our view, there needs to be an effective coordination mechanism between the RUS, the FCC, and the NTIA to ensure that any new broadband investment serves the highest purpose, and that is to give taxpayers the most bang for their buck. As we begin to envision the follow-on to CAF 2, we talked a little bit about here, the design for CAF 3 must ensure the process delivers the most value possible in getting broadband where it is needed by providers who have the wherewithal and know-how to deliver broadband sustainably over the long term. Having said all that, I'll now turn the conversation over to Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue, who needs very little introduction. Secretary Perdue became the 31st United States Secretary of Agriculture in 2017. He also served as a Georgia State Senator and as Georgia's governor from 2003 to 2011. Just this week, Secretary Perdue visited Moultrie, Georgia, which is a windstream exchange, where farmers in particular were hard hit by Hurricane Michael. Also want to thank all of the windstream technicians who have been working around the clock to restore service in those affected communities in Georgia. I want to thank him for that, his visit there, and note that as a farmer and a businessman, he has a deep understanding of the importance of technology and the role of innovation in rural communities. As Agriculture Secretary, he's elevated the conversation about rural broadband, describing it as transformative and as essential. I couldn't agree more. With that, I'll hand it over to Secretary Perdue.
Well, thank you, Tom, and good afternoon to all of you. It's good to be with you here. I appreciate the invitation to this 2018 Broadband Investment Forum. As I was coming in, I noticed some people on their laptops, on their iPads, on their phones, catching up and doing some work. Before we begin, just imagine if I were from the CIA and I could jam your signal and you wouldn't have access. That's the way much of rural America is. Contemplate that. We take it for granted where it's available, don't we? But I want to thank USTelecom for your members serving communities in the path of Hurricane Michael. Tony mentioned it, and certainly for all those linemen in the power and the telecom business, we appreciate their hard work and appreciate their effort to get back people connected again. I don't know how it is about your home, but in my home and our family, extended family with 14 grandchildren, the water can go out, the roads can be closed, the power can go off, but when you lose broadband, it's a crisis. So we become accustomed to that, and that's what we're used to, and that's your business, and we appreciate that. Bob Udell, and thank you, Clay Bailey, Mark Nielsen, and Verizon, AT&T, all of you are very important to our constituency in rural America, and we want to thank you for working very hard. Tony, I was really happy to hear the progress that Windstream's making in that, and I know there are probably great stories all along that could be told about the progress we're making in technology and connectivity and speeds and many things like that. As you indicated, this past Monday and Tuesday, I was in Georgia and saw the devastation for myself. Working to keep your networks up and running are really one of those behind-the-scenes type of heroic efforts that we don't acknowledge enough. And we take our communications for granted until it's not there, and then we panic. So I appreciate Commissioner Carr being here with us today, and obviously both of our federal agencies play an important role in a quest to make high-speed internet available to all Americans, and we look forward to working with FCC continually with this challenge. There's so many important uses of your product here. Some of the companies here are investing in telemedicine to improve health in rural communities, a real asset there for doctors are few and far between. One of those I know is led by the chair of your telecom board of directors, Anand Vadapalli, and the president and CEO of Alaska Communications. If you've been there, it's not very dense, and telemedicine is a huge help in those areas. So greeting to all of those who are joining us on live stream. Isn't that kind of neat to be able to do that? And thank you for all the broadband providers who are investing in this infrastructure to make live stream connections like this available to all Americans. We've got a lot of things out there that we need to connect. This is the type of real-world technology applications that is critical for today's real-time business environment operations, and even more so for future communications, such as telehealth, distance learning, and even high-tech precision agriculture. Connecting and exchanging real-time business data is no longer a luxury. It's a necessity for the U.S. economy. That means it's a necessity for everyone, including those in homes, businesses, farms, fields, schools, and healthcare clinics across rural America. On my very first day as Secretary of Agriculture, President Trump signed an executive order creating an interagency task force on agriculture and rural prosperity. If you know my boss, he doesn't sign executive suggestions. He signs executive orders. He expects them to get done. We spent 180 days studying that project, and we came to conclusions that we'll talk about today. We held meetings all across the country, heard from thousands of citizens literally. We quickly found that the pillars of economic innovation, workforce development, quality of life, what do they all require? Broadband e-connectivity in the 21st century. That's why our top goal is to expand access to high-quality broadband in rural America. Throughout our history, with every breakthrough in technology, there's been a seismic shift in connecting Americans with each other and with the world. I know that you know the history as well as I do. Think about this. The railroad and the telegraph opened the West. For example, during the California Gold Rush, the Panama Railroad down in Central America provided a shortcut for gold miners rushing to California. Not many years later, the railroad was the path for the Panama Canal that changed global commerce for over a century. The invention of the telephone opened the way for what some considered miraculous, the ability to hear and talk to someone who was miles away in real time. We've lost touch of the miracle of that, and think about that. As a nation, we've invested millions to make this miracle of communication available to all Americans. You know that the Telecommunications Act of 1934 funded the bold vision of connections to the last mile. And only 80 short years ago, in 1938, my parents moved to a house and a farm in Bon Air, Georgia, in middle Georgia. And guess what? They bought that house without electricity. But then, shortly thereafter, the Rural Electrification Act, 1936, it hadn't got to Bon Air, Georgia in 38, but the federal government funded the basic backbone of rural communications to modern power. They ran 100,000 miles of transmission lines and connected thousands of smaller networks, mostly to farms in rural America. And then came the automobile. Mass production of the automobile, along major roadway investments nationwide, made transportation available to the average American. You heard that famous Route 66. It was one American icon that emerged from that American innovation. Then, in 1956, the Federal Aid Highway Act created the interstate highway system. The federal government invested $616 billion, plus billion more dollars were invested by state and local governments. We constructed nearly 48,000 miles of interstate highways, with almost 2/3 of those miles in rural America. And if you've gone down those pathways, and I know all of you have, it's made a difference for those communities. Having grown up in Georgia, some communities that didn't want the interstate to come by have since chagrined at that decision, understanding where the economic development went and where it did not, and you know what I'm talking about. For example, the highway that runs 9 miles from my home runs from Canada to the tip of Florida, Interstate 75, connecting commerce, commuters, recreation travelers through the heart of America. But some rural areas along that route were left out of that prosperity brought by major infrastructure development. Railroads, the telephone, electricity, transportation were all technological revolutions that changed the face of our nation. Tony mentioned that I've called it transformative, and I believe it is. They ultimately were about what? Connecting people to one another. Now, we all need to be connected with the digital highway. Every farm, family, small business, school, and hospital should have an on-ramp to the 21st century highway. But today, high-speed internet is sorely lacking in rural America. 80% of the 24 million American households that do not have reliable, affordable, high-speed internet are in rural areas. Now we have a new challenge that the government and the private sector must tackle together. Even the United States government's not big enough to do this by itself, and we want to partner with you. USDA has been entrusted with programs to help meet that challenge. We make infrastructure loans, as you know, broadband loans, distance learning, telemedicine, and community connection grants. Congress recognized our stewardship of those programs and entrusted us with even greater dollars by appropriating $600 million in this latest budget for a new broadband loan and grant pilot program focused on rural areas. I'm sure you're aware of the criteria, but to be eligible for funding, projects must serve communities of 20,000 people or less. And also, these important criteria must be met. To be eligible to receive some of the funds, projects can only build infrastructure in areas where households currently do not have sufficient access to broadband service of 10 megabytes per second download and 1 megabyte per second upload, or as you all in the industry know, 10.1. It's also important to know that this 10.1 speed is an eligibility threshold set out in the new law, but based on what we heard from Tony, it is not a build-to speed. In fact, the law that created this rural broadband pilot gave us a framework but not a prescription, and that's just the minimal. We need the valuable wisdom and input from you, from industry, and the public before we can fully establish the way this new program will work. So we published a request for comments in the Federal Register to gather input as we develop the rules for this new loan and grant program. It was open for a response for 45 days from July 27th till September the 10th, 2018. And we received more than 250 comments, and thank you all for participating in that. We're using your important feedback to develop the rules for this new program. We appreciate all of your comments, hearing about the real-world need for rural broadband and ways to surmount the real-world challenges. This is important to us, so we're shifting through all the feedback we've received to design the best program. We're close to determining the rules, but we're not there just yet. The broadband team at USDA is still working out those final details. As soon as we're ready to go with it, you'll be able to find out about it, and we're not going to settle with just a press release. If you have connectivity, you can look at usda.gov/broadband. There you will be able to find and get the latest and most up-to-date information on this great initiative and answer some basic, frequently asked questions on the pilot. It's also where we will post the announcement about when the pilot funds will be available. That's really what you're interested in, right? As we do this work, there are several guiding principles that we will follow. We will ensure that USDA is a good steward of these public funds. I'm deeply humbled by the trust that Congress put in us, and I've committed to them that we're going to do a job they will be proud of. We will exercise due diligence in reviewing applications for projects with solid engineering, business plans, and management. As we review these proposals, we will seek projects where others have skin in the game. We will stretch federal funds as far as possible, and we're aimed to leverage existing structures, both physical and organizational. This is an important one. We will avoid using funds to overbuild existing services, that is 10.1 at the household. We will do our best to only invest these federal funds in rural places where private companies haven't already invested their own money in capital and operations. To effectively do this, we will need the help of rural broadband providers such as yourselves, who can help us verify if high-speed internet is already available in those areas. Let me paraphrase those famous words you may remember from Jerry Maguire. Let us help you. Help us help you. So another important objective is that we want to have the best solutions for the need. You may have heard that we're technology neutral at USDA in our broadband programs. It was interesting to hear Tony's variety of different technologies they were deploying, and that'll be the case with this pilot as well. We're not picking technologies. We're not smart enough at USDA to do that. We want to be able to co-invest with you all, private providers who want to build the various types of infrastructure that various types of rural communities may need. But we do want proven solutions, technologies that we all know will bring the affordable and sufficient broadband access to that rural Americans deserve. We're also organizational neutral. A rural broadband project sponsor may be an existing telecom, such as yourself, an electric cooperative, or even a partnership of the two. And we want to have a level playing field. Anyone can offer up their proposed solutions and show their responsible, sustainable plans for rural broadband expansion. I think we've all heard about federal grants and loan programs where the money was pilfered away. We're looking for a solid return on investment because our belief that this is a transformative opportunity we have. All in all, we want USDA to be investment partners to connect the rural areas of rural America that need that digital on-ramp to this new highway. One other important objective is that it should address the needs of farmers in the coverage area, not just at the homes, but across the fields with precision agriculture. Advancing in farming through the decades has always been revolutionary in our great country, and now is no exception. There are modern connected technologies that are setting the stage for the next ag revolution. For example, precision agriculture can operate at the sub-inch level to put the right kind of fertilizer at the right rate, at the right place, at the right time. And we're starting to see this transformation happen just in front of our eyes. The only limitation is connectivity. Our producers can take less of a calculated risk on seeding and harvesting. They've been able to narrow their planting window. Now, instead of having the big planting window of a whole planting season, they're down to specific days on the calendar, putting that seed and fertilizer within a cubic inch of one another. That technology can significantly increase yields with decreased inputs. That's American agricultural innovation at its best. That's real American ingenuity and productivity. It takes high-speed connectivity, though, to use some of this technology today. It will require even more bandwidth to flow all that farm data in the very near future. Another new technology that you all are familiar with, the blockchain, will give the small family farmer the ability to track crops from the harvest to the marketplace anywhere in the world, and vice versa, from the marketplace back to that field. It will open new paths to more customers across the globe. A bonus is that it will also help keep our food supply more safe and more reliable. It takes high-speed connectivity to process all that data in a timely manner and keep that data secure. So we have a lot of infrastructure to build to make these technologies possible on America's farms and ranches. At USDA, you may have heard of our motto. It's do right and feed everyone. E-connectivity is more than just being able to play games on the internet. It's the highway for commerce. It's a vital tool for feeding the growing world in our children and our grandchildren's future. Norman Borlaug has been credited with saving over 1 billion people worldwide from starvation. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the Presidential Medal of Honor or Freedom, the Congressional Gold Medal for his accomplishments toward his dream of ending starvation. I just wonder how he would use this new technology in farming to save even more lives. Do right and feed everyone at USDA is more than a motto for a growing world. It's our responsibility to use every tool available to the best of our ability to produce food and feed a hungry world. And that won't happen without rural America and technology. Rural America cannot do it without broadband e-connectivity. We need all shoulders to plow to meet the challenge for the next century of rural American prosperity and to feed the world. So thank you for allowing me to visit with you for a few minutes today. I appreciate what you do for our economy and our connectivity across America. So let's all do right and feed everyone. Thank you. God bless America.
We have time for questions. Anyone have a question? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, hi. Can you give us any sense on your timing as to when you do expect to make some sort of announcement as to the next steps in the program, the $600 million
Yeah,
program?
this is broad, but hopefully by the end of the year, we've got a timetable that's in draft right now, and then we will relay that as transparently as we can. You know how the federal regulations are, and I can't say a lot of specific things about that until we release it officially, but we are moving as expeditiously as possible. I've challenged our people to have us a good, solid plan in place by the end of the year.
We have time for one more question.
I think they're done. Thank you all very much. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Very much. We really appreciate your joining and spending some time with us today from all of us at USTelecom. Thank you very much.
There.